Picture a massive conference hall right in the center of Moscow. The year is 1920, and the conditions outside this hall are almost apocalyptic.
Yeah, I mean, that's really not an overstatement.
Right. The Russian Civil War is raging across thousands of miles of territory. The economy is just in a state of total catastrophic ruin. The rail lines are paralyzed, typhus is sweeping through the cities, and, food is so scarce that the daily bread ration is measured in ounces.
It's an incredibly bleak physical reality.
It is. The winter wind is howling through shattered windows, and the people inside this hall are shivering in heavy coats. And yet, despite the starvation and the freezing temperatures, delegates from across this vast, fractured country have gathered. But they aren't there to discuss grain requisitioning or military strategy.
Right, they're there for something entirely different.
Exactly. They have gathered to debate the future of human creativity. So, a man steps before the assembled delegates. He is the poet Vladimir Kirilov. He stands at the front of this freezing room, looking out at a sea of exhausted but just electrified people who genuinely believe they are standing at the absolute dawn of a new world. And Kirilov, well, he doesn't offer words of comfort.
No, he really doesn't.
He reads a manifesto disguised as a poem. He declares to the hushed room, "In the name of our tomorrow, we will burn the Raphaels, destroy the museums, and trample on the flowers of art."
That single violent declaration perfectly establishes the central theoretical question of this entire era. Like, what exactly should a revolutionary society do with the culture of the past?
Right, it's a massive question.
It is. When a new class violently overthrows the old order and seizes state power, how should it handle the artistic, scientific, and intellectual achievements of the class it just destroyed?
And the options being debated in that freezing hall were incredibly stark, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Do you burn the museums to the ground and start completely from scratch? Do you attempt to assimilate the old culture and learn from it? Or, do you try to leap over it entirely to create something the world has literally never seen?
Well, our mission for this deep dive is to answer that exact question. We are going to explore the explosive collision between revolutionary politics, art, and culture in the years immediately following the 1917 Russian Revolution.
We have some incredible sources to go through today.
We do. We're going to examine the historical records of a massive movement known as prolet cult. We're going to break down Leon Trotsky's profound theoretical text, literature, and revolution. And we will examine the harrowing physical reality of the Stalinist cultural counter-revolution that followed.
And before we jump in, we should clarify our approach here.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
As we navigate this incredibly dense, often brutal history, it is vital to remember our role. We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of any political faction, left or right. We are acting strictly as your guides, examining the historical events, the fierce ideological battles, and the theoretical arguments exactly as they are presented in the primary source material.
Perfectly said.
So, to understand how a society answers the question of what to do with the past, we really first have to understand the people who literally wanted to burn the museums down.
We have to look at the sheer, staggering scale of the prolet cult movement.
Exactly. And the name is a portmanteau for proletarian culture. By 1920, this organization claimed an astounding 400,000 active members.
Which is just a massive number.
It really is. You have to contextualize that number. In a country devastated by war, where survival was a daily struggle, 400,000 people were dedicating their time to this movement.
And beyond that, they had 80,000 people enrolled in specialized intensive studios.
Right. They were operating on a massive scale.
Yeah.
They were attempting to bring literacy, avant-garde theater, poetry, and visual art to a vast agrarian nation that was largely illiterate, a nation that had been historically deprived of any access to high culture by the Tsarist autocracy.
And the guiding spirit, the primary architect of this massive undertaking, was a man named Alexander Bogdanov.
Yes, Bogdanov. His biography is entirely unique. He was a trained physician. He was a prolific science fiction novelist, actually.
Yeah, he wrote some wild stuff.
He really did.
Yeah.
And in the early underground years of the Bolshevik faction, he was a very close equal ally of Vladimir Lenin.
He was a true polymath.
Yeah.
But his approach to politics and culture operated from a position of deep philosophical idealism.
How so? Like, what was his actual framework?
Well, to understand Bogdanov, we had to look at how he attempted to merge Marxism with the theories of the Austrian physicist Ernst Mach. Mach's philosophy, which is often called empirio-criticism, essentially argued that reality is nothing more than our sensory experience of it. It prioritizes the mind and perception above the physical world.
which, I mean, sounds like a pretty big departure from standard Marxism.
It was a total departure. By adopting this, Bogdanov was rejecting the absolute fundamental premise of Marxism, which is materialist.
Right.
The Marxist baseline asserts that the material world exists independently of our minds. It says that material conditions, like how we produce food, how we build shelter, the physical reality of the economy, are primary.
And so thought and culture come after that.
Exactly. Thought and culture are secondary reflections of that material reality. But from his idealist foundation, Bogdanov developed a theory that culture, politics, and economics are entirely autonomous spheres.
So they just operate on their own.
Yeah, he saw them as completely separate laboratories. He believed they do not necessarily depend on one another and that they develop according to their own distinct internal laws.
That is a wild way to look at a society in the middle of a civil war.
It is, and applying this to the revolution, he formulated what he called the laws of the new conscience.
Okay, and what were those?
The first law dictated that there shall be no herd instinct. The second law declared that there shall be no slavery. And the third law stated that there shall be no subjectivism of either a personal or group nature.
I mean, those laws sound pretty noble on the surface.
They do sound noble, but what they amounted to in practice was extreme subjectivism. It was the belief that the working class required a total moral, psychic, and cultural rebirth before they could ever hope to successfully take and hold state power.
Wait, really? Before they take power?
Yes. Because Bogdanov believed the mind dictates reality, he argued that consciousness had to precede material change. The moral renovation of the worker, achieved in the isolated studios of proletkult, was the absolute prerequisite for political revolution.
Okay, hold on. If I'm following this logic to its absolute limit, Bogdanov's framework means the workers taking over in October of 1917 were making a colossal mistake.
That is exactly what it means.
By his own rules, if the workers were not yet morally and culturally pure, he would have had to oppose the very revolution his former allies executed.
Right.
Let me put this in a modern context for you, just to make sure I'm getting this. Imagine a massive, thoroughly corrupt, failing corporation. The conditions are terrible. And the lowest level employees finally organize a hostile takeover.
Okay, I track.
They seize the boardroom,
Right.
and suddenly a highly paid management consultant walks into the room, looks at these victorious employees, and tells them they have absolutely no right to run the company.
Yeah.
The consultant says they cannot possibly succeed until every single one of them holds a master's degree in business administration and has achieved complete moral perfection. Like, did Bogdanov actually look at the workers holding state power and tell them they were doomed because they hadn't finished their cultural homework?
He did exactly that. Bogdanov firmly opposed the October Revolution. Yeah, he explicitly and publicly called it premature. He argued that because the working class had not yet forged a pure, independent proletarian culture in his laboratories, they were utterly unprepared to govern.
That is intense.
He warned that they had nothing to count on except the transition from one form of enslavement to another. In his view, without a new culture, they would simply trade the yoke of the capitalist owners for the new yoke of the engineers, the bureaucrats, and the educated administrators.
I see.
The core issue here is that Bogdanov completely inverted the method of historical materialism. Historical materialism argues that social being determines consciousness.
Meaning the physical reality shapes the mind.
Exactly. You change the material conditions of a society first, you take the factories, you distribute the land, and the culture will eventually evolve to reflect that new reality. Bogdanov substituted an abstract, idealized moral code for the concrete, messy reality of the class struggle.
Right.
He demanded a finished, perfect culture from a class that was actively starving and fighting for its physical existence.
Well, this creates an incredibly dangerous political reality. I mean, you have this massive organization, proletkult, operating with hundreds of thousands of members, heavily funded by the state, yet driven by a philosophy that inherently undermined the legitimacy of the state itself.
It was a massive contradiction.
It really was. So it is no surprise that this dynamic drew the intense, focused suspicion of Vladimir Lenin. Lenin watched the rapid growth of proletkult with escalating alarm.
He definitely did not like what he was seeing.
No, he didn't. He saw an organization that was attempting to cook up a pure, unadulterated proletarian culture in a controlled, sterile laboratory environment, completely divorced from the actual bloody work of building the new economy.
Right, separated from the real material struggle.
Exactly. So by October of 1920, Lenin decided the state could no longer ignore this. He intervened directly, drafting a resolution to firmly push back against Bogdanov's entire utopian project.
And Lenin's intervention is crucial because it cuts directly to the core of the Marxist understanding of human progress.
What did he actually say in the resolution?
Yeah. In that October 1920 draft resolution, Lenin laid down the theoretical law. I'll quote him exactly. He wrote, "Marxism has won its historic significance as the ideology of the revolutionary proletariat because, far from rejecting the most valuable achievements of the bourgeois epoch, it has, on the contrary, assimilated and refashioned everything of value in the more than 2,000 years of the development of human thought and culture."
That is a very different approach from burning the museums.
Entirely different. We need to analyze exactly what it means to assimilate and refashion. The authentic Marxist position requires the working class to master the existing culture of the past before they can even attempt to transcend it.
So they have to learn from the people they just overthrew.
Yes. You cannot simply discard 2 millennia of human achievement. You cannot burn the Raphaels. The proletariat must selectively and critically absorb the scientific, technical, and artistic heritage of humanity. Only by standing on the shoulders of the old world can they build a new one.
But put yourself in the shoes of a radical, newly empowered worker in 1920. You have just survived a world war. You have overthrown the Tsar. You have driven out the capitalists and the landlords. The entire world is turning upside down, and the adrenaline of total transformation is everywhere.
Right. The energy must have been unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And then, the unquestioned leader of your revolution is essentially telling you to calm down, go sit in a quiet library, and study the very bourgeoisie you just defeated on the battlefield.
Yeah, when you put it like that.
I mean, for a worker expecting an immediate, glorious new world, that mandate to study the old world must feel like a massive betrayal. It sounds like deflating the revolutionary balloon and returning to the exact same hierarchies they just fought to destroy.
It sounds conservative on the surface, I agree. But it was not a matter of conservatism. It was a matter of brutal, pragmatic survival.
How so?
Well, the working class did not take state power because they were highly cultured, perfectly educated, and morally flawless. They took power precisely because they were violently deprived of culture and material security by the capitalist system.
Right, they were oppressed.
Exactly. They were a disenfranchised, largely illiterate class. They had to inherit and master the physical and intellectual tools of the old world because they possessed none of their own.
That makes sense. They couldn't just invent everything from scratch.
No, they couldn't. They needed to learn how to run the railroads, how to engineer bridges, how to structure a sentence, and how to appreciate a symphony. The immediate task of the transitional period was not to invent a completely novel, abstract class culture out of thin air, but to systematically open the massive, locked gates of existing human culture to the masses.
This practical, urgent intervention by Lenin really set the stage for the man who would provide the ultimate comprehensive theoretical framework for this entire debate.
Yes, it did.
Lenin provided the immediate political correction, but in 1924, Leon Trotsky published a book titled Literature and Revolution.
Such a monumental text.
It really is. It was written in the immediate aftermath of Lenin's death, during a brief, incredibly intense period of artistic freedom before the bureaucracy fully hardened. This text stands as the theoretical summit of the controversy over art, culture, and the state.
It really dives deeply into the exact granular mechanisms of how a post-revolutionary society should handle human creativity.
Let's get into the specifics of what Trotsky actually argued.
Well, the foundational and honestly most controversial assertion Trotsky makes in Literature and Revolution is that there can be no proletarian culture. Ever.
Wow, never.
Never. To understand why he makes this claim, we must contrast the historical position of the proletariat with that of the French bourgeoisie.
Okay, let's look at that.
Under the feudal system, the French bourgeoisie spent centuries slowly accumulating wealth, developing trade networks, and expanding their cultural influence.
Right, they had a lot of time.
They did. Long before they actually seized political control in the 1789 revolution, they had already built magnificent architecture, funded groundbreaking science, and produced immense literary and philosophical achievements. They dominated the universities and the salons.
So they were already culturally dominant before they took power.
Exactly. They were a wealthy, culturally satiated class operating right under the nose of the absolute monarchy. They built their culture while still living under the old regime. But the proletariat is in the exact opposite historical position.
Because they don't own anything, right?
Right. The working class is entirely propertyless. They own nothing but their labor. They do not have centuries to build universities and fund orchestras while living under capitalism.
Yeah, makes sense.
Therefore, when they finally seize power, they are entering a strictly transitional phase, which Marxists call the dictatorship of the proletariat. The explicit stated purpose of this transitional phase is not to rule forever, but to abolish class society altogether.
Oh, I see.
So the ultimate goal is not to establish a permanent, rigid proletarian culture, but to dissolve all classes and create a universal, classless human culture.
I mean, that is a staggering argument to make to the victorious workers.
It really is.
You're looking at a population that just bled, froze, and died by the millions for a revolution, and you are telling them they won't even get their own dedicated culture out of it.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It sounds like you are telling them they are nothing more than a stepping stone. You are telling them they are just a temporary vehicle, a beast of burden meant to carry humanity across a bloody river,
Right.
rather than the main event of history itself.
Trotsky actually anticipated that exact reaction and addressed the sentiment directly.
What did you say?
He wrote, and I quote, "The proletariat acquires power for the purpose of doing away forever with class culture and to make way for human culture. We frequently seem to forget this."
So he was just bluntly reminding them of the end goal.
Exactly. He was reminding them of the ultimate goal. The sheer physical energy of the working class in the immediate aftermath of the revolution had to be spent entirely on survival.
Just staying alive.
Yes. It had to be spent on military defense against foreign intervention, on basic economic reconstruction of ruined factories, and on pulling a starving population out of the mud. This was simply not a period for the leisurely, organic cultivation of a new artistic style.
Because they didn't have the luxury of time or resources.
Right. Trotsky argued that by the time the material conditions actually exist for genuine cultural creation, by the time everyone is fed, properly educated, and physically secure classes will have ceased to exist. Therefore, the culture they produce will not be proletarian, it will just be human.
Yeah, okay. But if the party acknowledges that it cannot create a proletarian culture, what exactly is the party's role in the arts?
That's a great question.
Like, if you take state power but refuse to dictate a new artistic style, do you just step back entirely and let the artists do whatever they want?
This is where Trotsky introduces his second and third vital concepts regarding censorship and state control. He argues unequivocally that the political party cannot command art.
It cannot.
No. The party can lead indirectly through political censorship, meaning it has a right to protect the revolution from active, armed, counter-revolutionary forces or direct sabotage, but it cannot issue aesthetic decrees.
So they can stop someone from inciting a rebellion, but they can't tell a painter what to paint.
Precisely. It cannot tell an artist how to mix colors, how to paint a landscape, or how to structure the meter of a poem. And this core principle formed the basis for Trotsky's fierce defense of a group of writers known as the Fellow Travelers.
The Fellow Travelers. Who were they?
These were prominent, highly talented authors like Boris Pilnyak and Vsevolod Ivanov who accepted the physical reality of the revolution, but were absolutely not ideological communists.
So they were outsiders politically.
Yes, they were skeptical, they were politically confused, often viewing the revolution through a mystical or purely peasant lens. Yet Trotsky defended their right to publish.
He did.
He did. He wrote, "If we should eliminate Pilnyak, the Serapion fraternity, with Vsevolod Ivanov, Mayakovsky, and Yesenin, is there anything that will remain for us but a few unpaid promissory notes of a future proletarian literature?"
But why defend them? I mean, Pilnyak isn't a communist. Ivanov isn't a communist. If you are building a highly disciplined ideological state, why dedicate precious resources to defending writers who don't even share your ideology?
Because of the fourth vital theoretical concept in Trotsky's text. Art is a distinct form of cognition.
A form of cognition.
Yes. It is not merely a political weapon, and it is certainly not a tool for state propaganda. Art is a unique method for understanding objective reality.
How is it different from, say, a scientific report?
Science understands reality through data and logic. Art understands reality through images and emotion. This is why even deeply reactionary writers from the past remain absolutely vital to a revolutionary society.
Like who?
Look at Leo Tolstoy and Fyodor Dostoevsky. Tolstoy was a Christian mystic and a pacifist. Dostoevsky was a fierce anti-socialist reactionary who championed the Tsar and the Orthodox Church.
So they were completely opposed to the Marxist worldview.
Utterly opposed. Yet, Despite their conscious political ideologies, their art was so honest and their observations so acute that they told profound, irreplaceable truths about the human condition and the deep, agonizing contradictions of rest in society.
Because they were just that talented at observing reality.
Exactly. A shallow, schematic piece of political propaganda written by an obedient party member could never match the objective knowledge contained within Anna Karenina or the brothers Karamazov. True art bypasses conscious ideology to reveal reality.
That is a very powerful way to look at it. And these theoretical concepts, the rejection of a manufactured proletarian culture, the protection of the fellow travelers, and the belief in art as objective cognition, these weren't just abstract ideas floating in the air.
Not at all.
They were aggressively put into practice. To see exactly how these ideas manifested in the real world, we really have to look at one of the most brilliant, unsung editors of the era.
Oh, we definitely need to talk about him.
Yes. We need to set the scene in the year 1921. We are inside Vladimir Lenin's private apartment in the Kremlin.
Okay.
It is a meeting of immense cultural consequence. In the room are Lenin, his wife Nadezhda Krupskaya, the world-famous writer Maxim Gorky, and a veteran revolutionary named Alexander Vronsky.
Vronsky is such a crucial figure here.
He really is. Vronsky was an old Bolshevik. He was not some soft intellectual. He was a hardened revolutionary who had successfully run the industrial city of Ivanovo-Voznesensk during the absolute worst days of the Civil War.
He had real credibility.
Absolutely. And in this Kremlin apartment, surrounded by the leadership of the Soviet state, they are founding what will become the single most important literary journal of the 1920s.
Red Virgin Soil.
Exactly. It's a massive publication called Red Virgin Soil. You really have to imagine the physical reality of publishing this journal at the time.
Right, the resources were scarce.
There is a severe paper shortage. The printing presses are literally breaking down. Yet the scope of Red Virgin Soil was staggering. It published hundreds of thick pages a month, featuring literary heavyweights like Gorky, the booming poetry of Mayakovsky, the brutal cavalry tales of Isaac Babel, and a vibrant group of younger experimental writers known as the Pereval Group.
And Vronsky operated as a top-tier Marxist critic, and he ran Red Virgin Soil exactly according to the principles Trotsky outlined.
How did he manage all these different voices?
Vronsky fiercely defended the concepts of intuition and sincerity in literature. He argued for the irreplaceable particularity of the artistic image.
Meaning what, exactly?
For Vronsky, a true artist does not impose a preconceived political slogan onto reality. A true artist surrenders honestly to reality, removing the veils of social convention and ideological habit to produce genuine, unfiltered knowledge.
So no forced messaging.
Right. He absolutely rejected the deadening standardization that the early bureaucrats were trying to impose on Soviet literature. Vronsky understood that loud, blaring glorifications of the Communist Party might sound politically correct on the surface, but they were entirely devoid of inner content.
They were just empty noise.
Exactly. They lacked truth, and without truth, art is useless.
If you look at Vronsky's editorial strategy through a modern lens, it presents a really jarring parallel.
How so?
Well, you have a newly established, highly vulnerable state, completely surrounded by hostile foreign powers, deliberately funding a massive publication that actively platforms writers who are openly skeptical of that very state.
It does seem counterintuitive.
Let me translate this into modern terms. Imagine a highly disciplined, severely cash-strapped tech startup that has just launched a revolutionary new product.
Okay.
Instead of buying ads, the CEO takes the entire marketing budget and uses it to publish long-form critical essays written by people who absolutely hate technology and doubt the company will survive.
That would be a PR nightmare today.
Right. Why on earth would a revolutionary state, fighting for its very life, tolerate, let alone fund and distribute, this kind of internal skepticism?
Because for Vronsky and for Trotsky, objective truth-telling was the ultimate weapon of a rising class.
Even when the truth was ugly.
Especially then, a new society trying to navigate unprecedented historical territory does not need sycophantic praise. It needs a ruthless, accurate understanding of reality.
Okay, I see.
Art that uncovers the actual psychological and material conditions of human beings, their flaws, their doubts, their suffering, produces objective knowledge. If a leadership surrounds itself with yes men and funds propaganda that only reflects what it wishes were true, It intentionally blinds itself to the real world.
It lives in a fantasy.
Exactly. True art, even when it is critical, pessimistic, or politically confused, acts as a high-fidelity mirror to society, and a worker state needed that mirror to survive, adapt, and evolve.
And this vibrant, open laboratory of truth-telling that Vronsky and Trotsky cultivated did not just stay confined to Moscow.
Oh no, it went global.
It sent massive shockwaves far beyond the borders of Russia. The very existence of this experiment warped global artistic life. Let's look at specific examples of this global impact.
Sure.
Consider Claude McKay, the brilliant Jamaican-born black writer. In 1922, McKay traveled to Moscow to address the Fourth Congress of the Communist International on the Negro question.
That was a huge moment.
It really was. He stood before delegates from around the world and told them that anyone claiming black leadership or seeking black liberation needed to closely study the Bolshevik example of handling national and racial oppression.
The resonance of that is profound.
And consider the generations of writers who followed. Figures like Richard Wright, Langston Hughes, and Lorraine Hansberry found in this revolutionary Marxist framework a profound structural lens for understanding and articulating the black experience in America.
They saw a model that connected racial oppression directly to economic exploitation.
Yes. Or look at the heavyweights of American literature. Writers like Theodore Dreiser, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and the great literary critic Edmund Wilson were all engaging deeply with Marxist thought during this period, visiting the Soviet Union or grappling with its implications in their prose.
The sheer existence of a worker state and the cultural laboratory it fostered forced every serious artist on Earth to take a position.
Right, you couldn't just ignore it.
There was no longer any neutral ground to stand on. The revolution challenged the absolute baseline assumptions of global bourgeois culture. It proved that history had not ended.
It opened up a new horizon.
It did. Even the high modernists who recoiled from the revolution in horror and turned toward political reaction and fascism figures like the poet T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound were fundamentally defined by their political rejection of October.
Oh, that's a good point.
Their aesthetic choices, their fragmentation, and their longing for traditional hierarchy were direct defensive responses to the ideological challenge posed by the Soviet state.
The revolution functioned exactly like a massive cultural gravity well. Think of a supermassive black hole curving the fabric of space-time.
I like that analogy.
Whether you were an artist pulling yourself into a close, admiring orbit around the Soviet experiment, or you were firing your engines at maximum capacity trying to achieve escape velocity away from it, the gravity of the revolution was dictating your trajectory.
Yeah, exactly.
The shape of your art was determined by your distance from 1917. You could not ignore it.
Precisely. The revolution demanded a total aesthetic and political response. By simply existing, it proved that the capitalist mode of existence was not a permanent, unalterable law of nature.
Right.
Once that fundamental premise was shattered, every artist, philosopher, and writer had to reckon with what came next, whether they embraced the change as liberation or fought violently against it to preserve the old order.
But that massive gravitational pull, that incredible open laboratory of the 1920s, was about to violently collapse inward.
Yes, things changed very quickly.
Around the year 1927, a catastrophic political shift begins. The bureaucracy, led by Joseph Stalin, consolidates its grip on the state apparatus. Leon Trotsky and the left opposition are expelled from the Communist Party and driven into exile.
It's a total reversal.
And as the Stalinist bureaucracy tightens its political stranglehold, a new literary faction emerges to act as its cultural shock troops. They are called the Avant-Garde group, led by figures like Leopold Averbach.
And they had a very different view of art.
Very different. The demands of the Avant-Garde group are brutal, simplistic, and entirely uncompromising. They demand that literature be used strictly as a weapon of the state.
No more truth-telling just for the sake of truth.
Right. They demand the immediate purging of all the fellow travelers that Trotsky and Vronsky had protected. They take over the editorial boards, they control the paper rations, and they rally around a chilling, explicit slogan: Vronsky Carthage must be destroyed.
This cultural counter-revolution was the direct, unmediated expression of the political counter-revolution.
What was the bureaucracy's main goal here?
The rising Stalinist bureaucracy could not tolerate objective truth-telling because their entire grip on power was based on usurpation. They were actively stripping political power away from the working class and hoarding it for themselves, and they desperately needed a culture that would hide that fact.
So they needed to rewrite reality.
Exactly. This necessity is the exact origin of the doctrine of socialist realism. And we must be clear, Socialist realism was not a genuine literary style.
What was it then?
It was police regulation masquerading as aesthetics. Socialist realism formally demanded that art depict reality not as it actually was, but in its so-called revolutionary development.
Revolutionary development, meaning what?
In plain terms, artists were no longer allowed to paint the muddy, starving reality of a collective farm. They were forced to paint a gleaming, joyful, non-existent future and present it as today's truth.
So they were forced to lie.
Yes, art was physically forced, under threat of arrest, to depict exactly what the bureaucracy needed the population to believe.
Consider the severe, almost insulting contradiction here. The bureaucracy, through the Avant-Garde group and later the Writers' Union, claimed they were simplifying art specifically for the benefit of the average worker.
Right, they framed it as a populist move.
They argued that the complicated psychological nuances of the fellow travelers were too elite. They claimed they were making art accessible to the masses by giving them clear heroes and clear villains. But we have to ask, how does replacing complex, nuanced literature with shallow, state-approved propaganda actually help a worker?
It did not help the worker in the slightest. It helped the bureaucrat.
By keeping the workers in the dark.
Yes. By outlawing psychological depth, by crushing honest cognition and enforcing a sterile, state-mandated optimism, the state actively prevented the working class from understanding the reality of their own disenfranchisement.
That is chilling.
If the only literature you are allowed to read tells you that the state is perfect, that the leaders are infallible geniuses, and that your life is a glorious triumph, you are entirely deprived of the intellectual tools necessary to recognize your own oppression.
You don't even have the words to describe your suffering.
Exactly. Propaganda of this kind does not liberate the mind. It chains it to the immediate, cynical needs of the ruling apparatus. It replaces knowledge with compliance.
And this ideological shift, this enforcement of socialist realism, did not just result in a decade of incredibly bad novels and fake paintings. It had terrifying physical consequences for the brilliant minds who had built that vibrant laboratory in the 1920s.
The human cost was staggering.
The bureaucracy enforced its aesthetic demands with the secret police. There is a haunting photograph from the late 1920s that captures the sheer magnitude of this tragedy perfectly.
I know the photo you mean.
It features four absolute titans of the Soviet avant-garde standing together. In this photograph, you have Dmitri Shostakovich, the musical prodigy whose symphonies captured the agony of the century.
An absolute genius.
You have Vsevolod Meyerhold, the revolutionary theater director who invented biomechanics and redefined acting. You have Vladimir Mayakovsky, the booming, titanic, poetic voice of the revolution. And you have Alexander Rabinowitch, the visionary photographer and designer, whose geometric angles really defined the visual language of the era. Four undeniable geniuses.
And their fates are just horrifying.
We must look at exactly how the bureaucracy handled them. Mayakovsky, sensing the suffocating grip of the state and the betrayal of the revolution's ideals, committed suicide in 1930.
Yeah, a massive blow to the culture.
He was a desperate final protest against the strangulation of the culture he helped build. Then there's Meyerhold. He refused to completely submit to socialist realism.
He wouldn't compromise.
No, he wouldn't. He was arrested, brutally tortured by the NKVD until he signed a false confession and shot in 1940. His wife, the actress Zenaida Reich, was horrifically murdered in their apartment shortly after.
Just brutal.
Rodchenko was silenced. His radical photographic experiments were banned as formalist, and he was forced to churn out mundane state propaganda just to keep his rations and survive.
A slow death of his art.
Shostakovich physically survived, but he lived in a state of absolute daily terror. Following the state's denunciation of his opera, he literally slept in the freezing stairwell of his apartment building with a packed suitcase.
Wow, sleeping in the stairwell.
He did this so that when the secret police inevitably came for him in the middle of the night, they wouldn't wake and traumatize his family.
That is just heartbreaking.
And Alexander Vronsky, the brilliant editor who had championed truth-telling above all else, was expelled from the party, arrested, shot, and buried in a mass grave in 1937.
In 1936, observing this carnage from his forced exile, Leon Trotsky delivered a definitive verdict on this cultural devastation.
What did he write?
His words capture the absolute finality of the collapse. He wrote, "The most eminent artists either commit suicide or find their material in the remote past or become silent."
That is a stark assessment.
It is. This history, written in the blood of the avant-garde, completely dismantles the prevalent bourgeois myth that the Bolsheviks, by their very original nature, set out to crush artistic freedom.
So you're saying the original vision was different?
Entirely. The original Marxist method, developed by Lenin, articulated by Trotsky, and practiced by Vronsky, actively fostered an environment of fierce debate, protection for non-communist writers, and profound creation. It was the Stalinist bureaucracy, representing a hostile class force, that systematically destroyed the conditions where the tension between art and revolution could flourish.
It is a profound historical tragedy. The narrative we are often sold is that the revolution inevitably burns down its own culture, but that is false.
It is false.
It was not the revolution that burned down the vibrant laboratory of the 1920s. It was the counter-revolution. It was a bureaucracy wearing the revolution's skin, speaking in the hijacked vocabulary of Marxism, while actively and violently destroying everything the original revolution had built.
Well said. And the authentic Marxist method of cultural analysis, the belief in objective truth, the rejection of forced propaganda, the defense of artistic cognition, survived only in the physical works that remain from that initial explosive period.
The artifacts we still have.
Right. The critical essays of Vronsky, the groundbreaking films of Sergei Eisenstein like Battleship Potemkin, the early, vibrant issues of Red Virgin Soil. These works stand as permanent, indestructible proof of what the revolution made possible before it was completely annihilated by the bureaucratic apparatus.
We have walked through an incredible, harrowing journey today. You have seen how a genuine, fierce debate about the nature of culture pitting Bogdanov's utopian subjectivism against the grounded, materialist baseline of Lenin and Trotsky birthed an unprecedented era of artistic truth-telling.
It was a very specific window in time.
It was. You have seen how a state, in its most vulnerable moments, actively funded its own critics because it valued objective reality over comfortable lies. And you have seen how that vibrant laboratory was systematically strangled, censored, and literally executed by a bureaucracy that demanded absolute obedience over truth.
So why does this matter?
Right? Why does this history matter to you, sitting here today? It matters because it completely shatters the modern assumption that radical politics inherently demand sterile, state-mandated propaganda. The true revolutionary stance of the 1920s was not to dictate art, but to ruthlessly defend artistic freedom against state decree.
Which leaves us with a final, vital question for you to explore on your own.
What's that?
If the vibrant, necessary tension between political radicalism and artistic freedom was so brutally extinguished by bureaucrats in the 1930s, where does that tension live today?
That's a great question.
When modern institutions, whether they are massive corporate monopolies, tech platforms, or political parties, demand that art and media strictly serve a specific, sanitized, brand-safe message, are we echoing the spirit of the revolutionaries who wanted to liberate human culture? Or are we simply repeating the exact logic of the bureaucrats who silenced them?